Hello, and welcome to the weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report. I'm Melanie Bennett, and I'm here with my co-host, Shannon Boucher. We had a lot going on this week, as per all weeks in the Gender Wars, and we're going to share some of that with you. But first, Shannon, how was your Christmas shopping this week?
Well, I'm running late for recording our podcast this afternoon, and I apologize for that, Melanie. We all love Christmas shopping, of course, and all the parking lots with trucks taking up 2 spaces and people blocking entrances with carts and things like that.
The lovely Christmas tree behind you, anyway.
Yeah.
We have a little bit of Christmas cheer.
My Santa sweater on, and I'm tempted to start with a land acknowledgement, but we'll leave that for.
No, I think we're okay. We're gonna stick with a white supremacist, colonialist, Christian celebration of Christmas. You have your tree, and I have my little Christmas socks. We're gonna stick with that today.
That's a pagan tree behind me, just so you know.
Well, it's still colonial because it's European. It's Eurocentric.
Of course. Yeah.
Get with the program. So we have a transgender offender who appeared in the news from Edmonton this week, which we'll go over in more detail. We have an update from Melody Wiseheart, or Nicholas Cepeda, who's been all over the Canadian news, all over the international news. So there's been a few updates on that. We also have news from Windsor, Ontario, who have decided to not fly several flags. We have an update with the menstrual products in the men's bathroom. There's been a lot of news on that, so I thought we'd go over it again with some things that have been brought up. There was also an article from Radio Ici Canada with our friend Pierre Barns covering the pushback against gender ideology and SOGI in the Abbotsford region. There's been an article from our mutual friend Julia Malotte in the National Post. She talks about Carolyn Burjoski's recent updates with the Carolyn Burjoski case. And April Hutchinson, which is somebody that we've talked about a few times on this channel. There's been an update with her as well. And there's been a lot of support for her reinstating her into the powerlifting. And to end off, there's pretty much all updates this week. So there's a Policy 713 article that talks about some intervenors in New Brunswick on the gender identity lawsuit there. And Dr. Roy Eappen, which is Eappen.
I think it's Eappen. Yep.
Okay. Well, my mistake. Dr. Roy Eappen, who is a Canadian doctor, endocrinologist, has put out an article in the Wall Street Journal, and there's been some history with Dr. Eappen, as I understand. So we're going to talk about that as well. And to finish off the episode, Shannon's going to take us through. Actually, do you want to explain it a little bit?
Yeah, I will in a second. First of all, I want to thank all our viewers, as we do every week, for tuning in and checking out the weekly Gender Wars Report, liking and subscribing. This is one you probably want to watch to the end, because normally Melanie does a deep dive. She gets a little bit into the policy stuff. And we had this leaked video from an Ontario teacher that came into our hands a couple of weeks ago. Our goal over the Christmas holidays is to dive into this toolkit for Ontario teachers, the Trans-Affirming education in schools. And when I started looking at the materials, the toolkit itself is almost 100 pages long. And then the background reporting and survey results and assessment is another 130 pages. And it's really, really quite gobsmacking. I started looking at the second of those 2 documents yesterday, and I'm going to just share with you what I found in the first couple of pages that kind of blows my mind. We're going to also share a couple of videos there. Part of the reason I wanted to do this week is one of our viewers, a couple, reached out to me via email, and while I'm thinking about it, maybe we can overlay my email address on the screen, Melanie, because I'm happy to take emails. when I did that when I was running for school trustee, I got all kinds of crazy spam and random problems, but I'm willing to weather the storm if I continue to get emails like I've been getting from parents. In this case, parents from the Durham district where we have some friends, the DDSB Concerned Parents Group. This couple said, you know, what we're finding, we're very concerned about this. We know people in our church who are concerned about this, but a lot of people just don't believe what's happening in schools. So I wanted to, this kit was developed specifically from Ontario teacher feedback. It was created by academics at Western University. It has just been completed recently, and they're pushing this out. The video that we got was from a teacher's information session that teachers from all across Ontario were attending virtually, and there were people attending in person as well. So I want to drill down into that piece. And we're going to do a deeper dive that we want to put up early in the new year. It's really quite stunning, the level of, we talked about it earlier, the level of bigotry that these people are showing for normal parents and normal children. And so we're gonna dive a bit into that later in the episode. Make sure you stay tuned. Where do we want to start, Melanie?
Nicholas Cepeda has been in the news this week. It's been picked up by Megyn Kelly. It's been picked up by some people in the UK. I think she was on Sky News,
which is Australia.
Yeah. But a development that I wanted to talk about today that I picked up on was actually not that. It was the Women's Declaration International.
Yeah, great tweet. Just while Melanie's doing that, there we go. They wrote a letter to remind you, Melody Wiseheart, or Nicholas Cepeda, is a 50-year-old man who has been swimming in competition with Ontario teenage girls and changing in the change rooms with them. Last week, I kept saying Peter Menzies. I got that wrong. I apologize, Peter, and I apologize, David. It was David Menzies from Rebel News that broke the story.
Yeah, so Women's Declaration International, who've been doing a lot of work in terms of protecting women and girls from the invasion of males within their spaces, have put out a letter. They sent a letter to the mayor of Barrie and some of the president, vice president of Swim Ontario and Barrie Swim Ontario and Barrie Swim Club, pointing out some of the issues with allowing males in female sports. What they did in this letter, I thought was quite clever. They pointed out that the World Aquatics guidelines state that transgender individuals who've been through puberty should be competing in either their own trans category or in their natal sex category. And they're appealing to Swim Ontario to follow these rules, or that they could have followed those rules and still been within the regulation, because as they understand, it makes it difficult in Canada to create boundaries because of some of the laws here in Canada, but that those rules within the World Aquatics guidelines did exist. They also pointed out that allowing males to, in this case, it's not even males in female sports. It's a fully grown, middle-aged man who's been through puberty, who is competing with young girls and changing with them in young girl spaces. And one of the things that we talk about is how maybe not all trans individuals are predators, and nobody's saying that they are, but what it does is that it opens the door for people who may be more predatory, and allowing one individual makes it harder not to allow other individuals. And so it's almost like they're allowing a potential abuse to happen in the future. And this was signed by Linda Blade, amongst some other people who are involved in sports and do understand the importance of female-only spaces within sport. And just to point out, Nicholas Cepeda, or Melody Wiseheart, is a professor at the York University, and they're head of cognitive flexibility, the Cognitive Flexibility Lab.
Mental gymnastics.
And they focus on youth and children. So this is somebody in psychology focusing on youth and children in, I'm not quite sure what Cognitive Flexibility Lab, but in this case seems quite an ironic job title. But this is a person who probably should know better, really, given their job title.
He's really demanding cognitive flexibility from the general public, right? Like to just accept this as normal and regular and just fine, which it's not.
Speaking of potential predators, let me just skip to our actual predator this week, which is sort of kind of going down the line of what we've been trying to point out.
While you're doing that, I mentioned the Nanaimo Aquatic Center. This is, like I said, a theme. This individual who changed his name, gender identity, after being a convicted child sex offender in the Okanagan, moving to Vancouver Island, and then, changing his name to a female name, then flying under the radar. And it was Redux Magazine actually that broke that this guy on Vancouver Island was a child sex offender, and the police there weren't doing anything about it at all. And now we have our transgender offender here. Similarly, now there's another little crossover. We don't have equality before the law in Canada anymore based on race. And my friend Rupa Subramanya wrote a fantastic article for the Free Press for Barry Weiss this year about disparate sentencing based on race. And here we have an individual who is an Indigenous Canadian and is identifying as a female who, and because of these disparate sentencing and parole problems that we have and the loosening of these issues to put people back on the streets quickly, we have this guy out. Well, Melanie, how about you pick up the story from there?
Yeah, let's give a bit of context. So what happened is that this week there was this person here whose name, Laverne Travis Waskahat, like you mentioned, is an Indigenous person from Edmonton. Well, I don't know if they're from Edmonton, but this happened in Edmonton. They have a long history of convictions related to child images and child abuse. They have a preference for children under the age of 3, so babies and toddlers. So it's pretty severe. The police essentially had them because they'd violated some bail arrangement, decided to release them into the public. Now, let me just show you the report from the police, because I think this is a really important point to make. There was a media release from the police in Edmonton, and the police report says that Laverne Waskahat is a convicted sexual offender, and Edmonton Police Service has reasonable grounds to believe that she is of significant harm to the community and will commit another sexual offense against a child under the age of 16. Now, one of the conditions of bail is they can't even be around someone who has a child under the age of 16 or something like that. And so this is quite serious. The Edmonton police knew that this person was a threat, in fact, warning the public that they're probably going to do it again, and yet released them. 3 days later, this individual was rearrested again. There were some conditions that were broken, and so they were found again. They'd escaped being apprehended, and this whole kerfuffle happened. But 3 days later, they were apprehended, and they were apprehended in the possession of baby items. I think there was a crib in this person's possessions. They had drawings, inappropriate graphic drawings of children. So it was basically going back to the same behavior. So the police told you that they were engaging this behavior. We're probably going to do it again. And lo and behold, they were doing it again. So the first question is, why was this person released if they knew that they were going to do it again? This put people in harm's way. But the other really interesting thing about this is that one of the things we talk about here is when you allow people to indiscriminately identify as the other sex, what can happen and is happening, such as this case, is that people are choosing to identify as trans to get away with their crimes. So the reason I'm saying that is that this person, the first time they were apprehended, when they started getting in trouble, they were a man. They identified as male. They never showed any signs of being transgender or feeling born in the wrong body, and only recently started identifying as female. So I think a lot of predators know that this is an advantage to them to identify as transgender, because not only do they get put in female prisons should they get apprehended, but they get access to women's spaces. And women and a child predator like this will want to be around women with children. And if you're a woman and you can be around other women with children, like, the links are obvious. And so this is a really clear case of what we keep trying to warn about, is if you indiscriminately allow these things to happen, they're going to happen. And the police in this case are telling you it's going to happen again. We're warning you. So here's a press release. So we're saving ourselves by warning you. But sorry, guys, it's going to happen again.
Yeah. Melanie, do you remember the WiSpa debacle?
Was that in Canada?
No, it's not a Canadian story, but
No.
it kind of connects to this. I want to say it was July of 2021. there was a man who entered a Korean spa in Los Angeles called the
Yeah.
WiSpa. It's a very well-known spa. I think it's either in Hollywood or close to Hollywood. And this is a traditional Korean spa. It's segregated by biological sex, and it's a naked, not nudist isn't the right word. It's just traditional that when you go to this Korean spa, that these types that it's wear clothes. And there are
Yeah.
on the women's side there are women from grandmas right down to young girls with their moms and their families. And there was a man who entered the spa, changed in the change room. It went viral because some women were confronting the staff at the front counter, saying, "There's a man with penis and testicles who is in the change rooms, and you got to do something about this." And they were told, "Well, this is human rights, and this is the law, and so you just kind of have to do it." But what was really shocking, there's two things. One is the egregious thing was he went into a hot tub with three generations of women and basically hung himself out above the edge of the hot tub, legs in the pool with his man spreading for these women. This is an exhibitionist. It was his identity wasn't figured out for a while. There were riots in the streets in LA about this. There was Antifa that came out. There was violence. There was people clubbed. I believe there was a stabbing. It was huge. It was a huge controversy. And then it came out that he was a sex offender, just like the
Yeah.
case in Nanaimo. And then there was a release of a conversation with him that some journalist had got a hold of him, didn't kept their source secret or whatever. And this was planned, just like you said. His idea of claiming that he was transgender was knowing that he was going to go to jail, knowing again that he was going to get caught for his activities, his exhibitionist, his predatory behavior. And because California law, just like Canada, says that men who self-identify go in women's prisons, his plan was, hey, like I got it good on the outside, and I'm going to have it good on the inside, and I'm going to pursue my predatory fetishes wherever I am, and this is all part of the plan. He said this explicitly. This is part of a pattern.
Yeah. Well, people are starting to be fed up with it. I think, although there's many people who also think this is not happening. At the same time, there are many more people who are starting to realize what's going on. And when they do find out what's going on, I'm going to do my little segue here. They start saying no more.
Yeah.
And the person who's most recently said no more is Windsor. Windsor City Council have just voted to no longer fly any flags that are not federal, provincial, or municipal flags anywhere outside government buildings and in the municipalities. They didn't specifically say no Progress Pride flags. What they did say in the article is that they were having too many requests for other flags to be flown.
I love it.
So they just decided that they were only going to fly just the regular citizenry flags.
Yep.
Now, if you
want to be inclusive, you got to include everybody.
The president of the Windsor Essex Pride Fest, Wendy Nicholson, she told a radio news station, AM 800, that it's a horrible and terrible decision. This person actually, around Pride this year, let me just bring it up.
Windsor did a really amazing job. We spoke there on September 21st, you and I, Melanie, with Pierre Barns and with Scott Nugent, to about 100 people from Windsor parents organizations. And they had 2,000 or 3,000 people out for their September 20th Million March protests. And it's really got some good traction there. And I think this is an extension of it.
Yeah, all I was going to say is that, so this is the person that made it about the Pride Progress flag. This is the same person who made a lot of hoo-ha about this around the Million Marches. Well, this is, in this case, June, so that would have been around the Pride Month. But there's been some pushback here. The point that she was trying to make, this Wendy, the point that she was trying to make is that when you don't fly the Progress flag, you make that area unsafe. With this ruling, she considers that Windsor is now an unsafe place for people within the LGBT community.
Yeah.
But I'm going to push back on that and say that I
Emotional
agree with
blackmail.
Windsor because it's political. We've pointed out on this channel multiple times and shows you that it is a political identity, the Progress Pride. But beyond that, the council did say, we don't want to do this anymore because we've been inundated with requests for all these other flags. And so what she's implying is that if we don't fly the Filipino flag, then every citizen in Windsor who's Filipino is inherently unsafe, which is a ridiculous argument to make. This is more activism that has been quashed. So people are waking up to allowing so much activism in politics into regular citizenry, day-to-day life is maybe not such a great idea. So that's some good news. Well done, Windsor Essex.
I think this is a great strategy. I've talked with parents from across the country who are petitioning their school boards to fly other flags and petitioning their municipalities to fly other flags on special occasions. I think it's terrific that enough people mobilized on this. So it's not saying, I guess there's a plausible deniability here, and maybe it is. Maybe people have just got it in their minds. You know what? I'm from an oppressed minority, and this is there was a genocide in Turkey, and I'm one of those descendants of people. My grandparents' family was killed in the Holodomor in Ukraine and in Kazakhstan. And there's some, that we need to remember those things and make sure that we're safe. And there's got to be a flag that goes along with that. So if one small minority is getting special privileges to have their flag flown to celebrate their safety, why the hell not petition the organizations? Like you can't give one group special privileges and not give others. So in fairness, I think Windsor Essex has made the right decision here and stopped the debate around flags very elegantly. That's saying, you know what, we're just going to go by what the traditional flag raising is for our municipality.
Another update this week with the menstrual products in male toilets.
And I'm standing in the hall of my Confederation building on Parliament Hill. This is my Ottawa office, so you can see right here. So this is a federally regulated space. I'm a federally regulated employee. Now I'm going to take you on a little tour today, and I'm going to show you something that I think is going to astound you. When we talk about wasteful spending and a cost of living crisis that is created because of wasteful spending, I'm going to tell you something. The average income of a Canadian is around $65,000. That's according to online sources that we have sourced. The average income of a federally regulated employee is $70,000. Now, period poverty is a very real thing, and we have the highest food bank usage in history, meaning people who can't afford food also can't afford period products. So you will see many often period products in food banks, which makes total sense. But what if I told you the Liberal NDP government is mandating that period products be available in all federally regulated workspaces? So for people who have an average income of $70,000, they are going to have access to period products. Shouldn't that be going to people who can't afford them? Dylan is from my office. Dylan, we're going to go into the men's bathroom here in a federally regulated building. You're going to give a little check for me, make sure there's no one in there.
Hello? No, we're good.
Okay, we're good. Come on in. So this is the men's bathroom, and I want to show you what has been put in the bathrooms. That is period products for federally regulated employees. I can't stress enough to you how out of touch this is in a cost of living crisis when people who can't afford to eat, they can't afford to buy these things. But again, the Liberal NDP government is prioritizing their own needs over the people who are most vulnerable and hurt by their policies that is driving up the cost of living. This is not common sense. I hope you share this video. And you know what? I might just take a couple of these myself and walk them down to the Ottawa Food Bank where they would be best used.
Michelle Ferreri was so this is not her, but she put out a video. She's the MP for Kawartha and Peterborough. and
Durham.
in the Durham region,
Yeah.
right? So she put out a video kind of walking into the male toilets and pointing out that this was a waste of, why spend money on this when there's some other real things that we need to be spending money on? And she had a bit of a rant about that, and she was kind of attacked by some other people on Twitter over it, and I'm sure some other social media. She's made herself a bit of a target. But this is the same MP, I think she's an MP, who put out the petition. In fact, I'll bring it up. She put out a petition for removing the Prime Minister of Canada on the basis of, what was it? Here it is. No confidence. So this is the lady that basically has this parliamentary petition that's saying we no longer have confidence in Justin Trudeau. Please sign this, and we will remove him within 45 days. Currently has 335,000 signatures, which is broken records. But this is the same lady who did that. There were some other people who came out with some responses, not necessarily to her, but to the menstrual products. And in this case, this person pointed out the article in the Epoch Times that although the males or men were joking about it because all of the men were cis men, I guess they were regular men in the services, but they pointed out that the military has been struggling with budget cuts for a long time, and they need all kinds of equipment. So in this case, they're pointing out laptops, chairs, desks, printers, scanners. There's just a lot of things that they need because they've been lacking in funds for a long time, and these have always been denied. Yet they're willing to spend money on getting menstrual products for women, and I'm considering women and females to be the same here. They're the same in males' toilets. So this is what Michelle was talking about. This is what she was complaining about, is that there's a lot of virtue signaling when it comes to the menstrual products in female spaces. And then another interesting tweet that came out from Billboard Chris, who implored men to go into those federal toilets, because it's not just the military, it's all federal buildings.
RCMP as well have said that the officers have confirmed it in male bathrooms in RCMP places. Yep. Yeah.
So he implored all men to go in, grab all of those products, and please donate them to women's shelters. I might include here possibly food banks as well, which I think is actually quite a good thing to do. And I think Michelle also in that video that she was attacked quite a bit. There's been a lot of pushback, pretty nasty stuff too.
I thought she did a great job.
I think they're really mad. She did a great job. Yeah, I think leftists are really mad that she has a petition to remove Justin Trudeau right now. And she's successful. The most successful petition in the history of Canada so far. It surpassed the Hamas ceasefire petition. So
if you haven't signed it yet, and you're tired of the current government, do go and check that out.
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to take a little time and just show you this again. It's this Parliament of Canada. The website is ourcommons.ca. It's petition E4701 by Michelle Ferreri, and you can read through it. She explains it here. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Go read it yourself. I signed it. I'm assuming Shannon did. I'm assuming you signed it.
I'm going to put the link in the video thread, so you can just scroll down there and click on it, and if you're so inclined, do sign it and see. I mean, it's got some momentum, and
that says a lot about how Canadians are feeling right now.
Indeed,
she's certainly reflecting how a lot of Canadians feel. So well done, Michelle, for that. That is awesome. So what's next on the list here? Oh, we've got April Hutchinson. We've spoken about her before on this podcast. April is a Canadian powerlifter who got in trouble with the Powerlifting Association, which I can't remember what they're called off the top of my head here. Essentially, she pointed out that trans women, males, shouldn't be competing in female powerlifting, that there was a real strength difference between males and females, and that this was causing issues. She didn't say that they shouldn't be allowed. I think she did point out that they should be able to compete, that everybody should be able to compete, but we should do it fairly, and that they should have their own category, like a trans category. And we see this often with sports, is that people say, yeah, do compete, please do. Because one of the pushbacks is, well, you don't want trans people to compete. That's bigoted. Well, no, you compete if you want, play if you want, but do it fairly in your own category. They don't want this. It's not about fairness. It's about imposition, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So this is what April said. And she was suspended from powerlifting over it. And she went on to Piers Morgan to talk about it.
She's been on a couple of high-profile shows about this and really getting the word out on this issue.
Well, she said in this Epoch Times article that actually the attention by getting suspended helped raise awareness of what was going on. Because even before I became involved in talking about this stuff and getting involved in the pushback myself, I was aware of this situation. My trainer, because I do lifting as well, and my trainer knew all about her. So she has managed to raise awareness with this particular issue. And the update that this week is that there's a petition out that 8,000 people signed to reinstate her, to lift her suspension from powerlifting. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. And another little link is that her lawyer is Lisa Bildy, who is also Amy Hamm's lawyer.
Yeah, Lisa has represented quite a number. She's lovely. She's really involved in this transgender issue and has been for.
I managed to meet her at the Lighthouse event. That was nice. I wasn't expecting that.
I'm glad you connected. Speaking of Epoch Times, I'm trying to get to an article here because I was written up in the Epoch Times this week, and that didn't come up in our segment briefing, Melanie.
Oh, no. Yeah. I had no idea. This is surprise. Yeah. It's a Christmas miracle.
And I'm a subscriber to Epoch Times. It is behind a paywall. Let me, I've got the article here. I'll pull it up. And I got to anchor this particular article that described Tara McIsaac. Her and I have talked before, and she has quoted me in other articles. Parents increasingly speaking out about gender sexuality in Canadian schools. She did a fantastic job of covering off what was happening in regions all across Canada on the gender issue. She asked me for what I was hopeful about. I gave her three things. One was the Parents' Rights Coalition of Canada that's organizing. We're having a general meeting / conference event on the 27th of January. We're putting together 3 or 4 hours. You'll be able to attend by Zoom. We're going to have a number of different speakers and presenters and resources made for parents and for people concerned about the school issue. And the other example I gave was Jess and Mike, DDSB Concerned Parents, who had a really great meeting with the school board there. I might have mentioned that before. And I'll just, it was a fairly lengthy article. Shannon Boucher, a parent who's been active on this issue for years since his daughter transitioned, told Epoch Times he's hopeful that parents are becoming more organized in their advocacy for parental rights. He gave examples of the Parents' Rights Coalition of Canada, that's GDSB Concerned Parents, that formed in July. Members of the group recently met with Durham District School Board in Ontario, were very effective in getting beyond the thought-stopping narratives and accusations of bigotry, hate, and transphobia. Successfully getting their concerns to the table and having them heard is a big, big win. It's getting out there. Epoch Times has been very supportive on this issue for quite some time, and I'm glad they're covering the April Hutchinson issue as well.
Well, that's interesting. Didn't even know that happened this week. Okay, so moving on. We've got a lot to cover this week, so I'm sorry if I'm rushing through some of these. We have so Pierre Barns, who is French Canadian, and he has a website, Soji Task Force 123, I think. Yep. We're going to be speaking to him in the new year at a podcast, so we'll go over his website. He's the expert
on books. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you unshare your screen, Shannon?
Oh, apologies.
So there was an article from Radio-Canada, ici Radio-Canada, which he tagged me on, and we don't often get French language gender news, or at least I don't. So I was interested to go read it. It is CBC related, and so my hopes for it being fair were not high. And the result of reading it also wasn't super great. I've been reading so many positive news articles recently. So, for example, the Epoch Times article that you just spoke about, or some other articles who are more accurately reflecting some of the efforts on the ground that people are engaging in. I was, I guess, a little bit surprised at the writing in this particular article. Now, if you do read French, I implore you to read it if you're involved in any way in gender ideology pushback or you have some knowledge about it, because this CBC article is absolutely trash. So one of the first things is that they frame the pushback. So Pierre Barns and a group of Sikhs, essentially, it's kind of all of them. It's a whole bunch of people have been really pushing back in Abbotsford for quite some time, especially since the summer, since the Pride Fest. So they've been really, really active in pushing back and making a lot of fuss. They got one of the MPs to MPPs to read a book, a very explicit book in the legislature, which then got attention from the media and had the NDP Minister of Education. There's a petition right now to have her removed. Yeah. And so this article kind of covers that, but it frames these parents as extremists. It frames them as them framing as their issues as concern, but it really being about bigotry. And they talk about Rakna. Her name is Rakna Singh. This is the BC Minister of Education, who's NDP. And when the books were read, she said, no, they're fine. It's fine. And these are very explicit books. We covered it on this channel. And so that's why this petition went around, is because this minister was defending graphic sexual material being read to children. In this case, this book was aimed at 11 years old. And in the legislature, the MP was stopped from reading it because it's inappropriate to read this thing amongst adult company, yet the Minister of Education, Rakna Singh, was saying this is perfectly acceptable for young people. So they never talked about books in this article. They never mentioned why this person, the way that they explained it, these parents are having Rakna Singh removed. They're having her removed from her job, but they never mentioned why this, that there's a petition, why this petition is going around, what these books are about. They never mentioned books at all in the article. They use this nonsensical. So in French, I've noticed, here we have they, them, or whatever, but in French, they've invented pronouns that don't exist in the language whatsoever, like IL. It does not exist. Je suis franco-canadienne, je parle en français, je comprends l'article. IL is not a word, and yet has been invented to satisfy non-binary identity. So they use that in this article. There was a couple of other things.
There was a CBC...
Oh, yeah, they're saying... Go on.
Well, we'll stay on this subject and cover it off. And maybe while you're having a look there, Melanie, I'm going to just read from a note from a woman in Quebec who's founding a parents group there. We're kind of in the two solitudes. We don't get to follow a lot of Quebec media, like you said. And I had a lengthy conversation with this mom yesterday about some of the things going on in Quebec and what's coming. Here's a quote from her. Another story from the GRIS, G-R-I-S, Montreal, which is that's kind of like their EGAL, I think, their trans activist organization. They sent a trans woman into a school in Gaspésie, Île-de-la-Madeleine region. Afterwards, 7 to 8 girls, 13 years old, told the school staff they wanted to become boys because they didn't like girly stuff and preferred fishing, hunting, and riding ATVs, which are common activities in that area. It took 6 weeks for the staff to undo the damage done and convince the girls that these activities are not for boys only. When one staff member contacted the GRIS to complain, she was told that her speech was transphobic, that according to their trans expertise, she was a repressed non-binary, and that these girls should have been affirmed without question and helped in their transition. Now, Carolyn is one of the people who's going to be able to speak publicly in Quebec in this parents group. She's going to give us some media insights about some things going on there. There has been some good headway in that, and I'll hand it back to you, Melanie, because
yes, we definitely need more French-speaking people. I'm bilingual, but I spent most of my life speaking English, so I'm probably not the best place for it. But we do need more French-speaking people to cover some of these things, because we need to translate. Like this article, okay, it is complete bad faith. This is Pierre Barns. This is our friend. He has a website that is excellent. It really breaks down a lot of these things with evidence from the schools. So it's telling you which schools have these things. It gives you screenshots and PDFs of the material within these books, so they're irrefutable. Now, this journalist could have gone to his site and read any of those things and reported on it, but they didn't. What they did is they said that Pierre Barns is a man who has this website that is anti-LGBT. They never give the web address to his website, never say what it's called. Then they basically frame him as violent. They say here, j'ai mis la face du directeur publiquement en ligne sur Facebook et j'ai dit au monde exactement ce que je faisais dans mon école. Le fait que j'ai shamé publiquement, ça a vraiment avancé les choses selon moi. What that means is what Pierre always says. He says, you got to get right into their face and tell them that what they're doing is shameful and they shouldn't do it. And we don't accept these things in the school. Like Pierre is very, no, you cannot do this to children. He's a father. He's saying, no, this is unacceptable. But the way it's framed in this article is that he's almost like an intimidating, violent character, even though they're using his threat anyway. So there was that. What they do sympathize with in here is that, so this IL, this non-binary individual, saying that all Soji is doing is increasing inclusivity in the schools and it's perfectly fine, and all these parents are sowing division, even though what they don't recognize is that since this Soji stuff has been put in school, that is what's causing the problem, not the parents pushing back. Yeah. It's the fact that they're trying to sexualize children. And then you have journalists like this who are either not doing their homework at all, because there's some not only glaring lies, but mistruths and twisting of the truth, omissions in this article. So he's either not doing his homework at all, which is not a good look for a journalist, or you didn't even bother to look in the first place, which is not a good look for a journalist. Mm-hmm. This is our state-funded media at this point. This is the CBC. This is the Canadian Broadcasting Company showing again that they're either paid for or completely incompetent. So if you read French, be my guest.
It's a little of both. It's maddening. These kinds of behaviors, and we'll dive a little bit more in our deep dive into some of these tactics. These are tactics of abusers at scale. This is gaslighting. This is minimizing. This is minimizing concerns. I mentioned before, I grew up in a household with an abusive parent, and in my 20s, I did some really hard work. My life was not at all in good shape, and I went through some serious healing circle, and with other people, I heard horror stories about sexual abuse and physical abuse and mental emotional abuse. And these are patterns that play out over and over again. And there are enablers in family dynamics where there's abusers. And enablers make excuses for the abuser. They minimize what the abuser is doing. They pretend it's not happening. They are proxies for the abusers themselves. So, CBC and these reporters are acting in capacities of enablers by the way that they're reporting. And in some of the sort of back room, Slacks and Discord rooms that I'm privileged to be a part of, I got an exchange that one of the activists had sent an email to the senior editor at CBC about Jonathan Montpetit's hit piece on James Cantor, the sexologist who testified at the Amy Ham hearings. And his hit piece came out the day before James Cantor was set to take the stand, or the week before as well, in several different versions. And the senior editor was just plain gaslighting the concerns of the parent writing these letters and complaining about how biased the article was. So now there was an article that actually wasn't too bad that came out in CBC this week, having to do with policy 713 in New Brunswick. The unusual number of intervenors. So there's going to be legal case on policy 713, which is the secrets bill. The deadline for submission for intervenors was November 30th. There are 14. Oh, you got it. There are 14 intervenors from LGB activist groups, and there are 2 approved intervenors from the other side, from the gender critical side. And we know Karen Litsky, who's involved with Our Duty Canada, who is the spokesperson, for Our Duty, or the point person on this one with UNB, with New Brunswick government. So when they talked about this, they were somewhat neutral. They weren't as dismissive, obviously obtuse, leaving out information as they were about, Pierre Barns.
Excellent.
Well, there was some update with Carolyn Burjoski this week. Julia Malott put an article in the National Post, and that was before Carolyn put up her video. So we know that a couple of weeks ago there was a judge in favor. They dismissed the attempt to dismiss the case of defamation against the board and Scott Pietkowski. That was a victory for Carolyn, but kind of overshadowed by that was a decision by a judge in her judicial review case. So she filed a judicial review of the behavior of the board, who cut her off and refused to let her complete her presentation. And this is what the article came out about. Julia said that, alluded that maybe Carolyn should run or might have to run for the, do you have the video? Can you play it off there? Let's see it.
Well, do you want to finish your thought?
Well, the news is that Carolyn and Lisa Bildy, who we mentioned, are filing. Is it Lisa? I think so. Certainly the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms are filing an appeal on the decision in the judicial review case where the judge said, no, we're not going to make a comment, or we're not going to disagree with Scott Pietkowski on the board's decision to censor Carolyn.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carolyn Burjoski. Today, I'm addressing a critical issue that affects our fundamental right to freedom of expression in Canada. Back in January 2022, at a meeting of the Waterloo Region District School Board, I was silenced and removed for voicing my concerns about age-inappropriate content in some elementary school books. My respectful presentation was cut short by the chair, who wrongly accused me of violating the Human Rights Code. This was not just a violation of my right to free expression, but a stark display of authoritarian speech suppression in a public forum where diverse viewpoints should be welcomed and discussed. In a response, I filed a judicial review requesting that the Ontario Divisional Court reverse the board's decision and allow me to complete my presentation. Sadly, on November 29th, the court ruled against me. They dismissed my review and stated that the board's decision to halt my presentation was reasonable. This ruling is deeply concerning. It could set a troubling precedent for free expression in Canada, empowering school boards and other public bodies to silence and censure every voice they disagree with. So today, I am escalating this matter to the Ontario Court of Appeal by filing a notice of motion for leave to appeal. This is not just about a school board meeting. It's about the integrity of open dialogue on important issues in our educational system and other public forums. Our democracy thrives on diverse opinions and the freedom to express them. It's vital that our judicial system protect our charter rights against administrative overreach that stifles our free speech. I am fully committed to this cause and am deeply grateful to the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms for sponsoring this appeal pro bono. I encourage you to support JCCF financially in their relentless work to safeguard Canadian freedoms. For updates and detailed information on this case, please visit my website and join my email list at canceledteacher.com.
I think we can stop it there.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
How are we doing on our...
Well done, Carolyn.
Yes, indeed. If you're wondering what can I do, I finished reading a book, it was probably August of 2021, Trans, When Ideology Meets Reality by Helen Joyce. And at the end of the book, she says, this is my contribution. And at the end of Deborah So's book, she leaves the reader with that question, what can I do? What can you do as a reader? What steps can you take? Carolyn was a teacher. She taught elementary school for 20 years, a normal person going about a normal life, and had the courage when she saw something that didn't sit well with her to stand up for it. And she didn't anticipate this level of response, but she's risen at every stage courageously, and with the support of groups like the JCCF, people in the Lighthouse Network. She has huge and broad support. And you might be asking yourself the same question, what can I do? Well, one of the things you can do if you really are stuck for something is write to your municipality and ask them to display a flag other than the Pride Progress flag and get other people to do the same thing. Or you can talk to people. I mean, we're in the holiday season. And the holiday season, we're gathering with families. This is a big and growing question. A year ago, there was nowhere near the kind of media that we're seeing on the issue of trans incursions into our spaces and into our lives, and this indoctrination of children in schools. This needs to be a dinner table conversation. We need to be comfortable with the courage to stand up. Most people agree with us. It is only the extremists and these ideologues that are, unfortunately, they have an awful lot of power, a disproportionate amount of it in our society today, and they're abusing it. And it's showing in cases like this issue with Carolyn Burjoski. It's showing in Abbotsford and Chilliwack, BC, where the school boards are acting egregiously. They're banning some groups from presenting, and they're shutting conversations down. They're in Mission. They're dancing and turning up music to drown out concerned parents at a SOGI information session. We have to stand up. If we don't, then we're just handing everything over to the activists.
I would agree. I think the most important thing is to educate yourself first and foremost, and then try to educate other people, because these activists, they don't lay down their arms.
No, they don't lay down, they double down.
Yeah. And so what happens is that if you're unprepared with not enough understanding, which is kind of the point also of these breakdowns, which we're about to do shortly, is to try to help people understand the picture. Not just like you can go watch James Lindsay breakdowns or American videos that break down the things that are happening in other countries, but we need to understand what's happening in our country so that we can understand that and we can share that with other people. So it's not just, it's those crazy right-wingers who these radicalists in America who are maybe very religious, who don't like LGBT people, who are pushing back. No, these things are happening in Canada, and we need to educate ourselves on where it's happening, who it's happening to, so that we can help other people understand. And because, like the article for Radio-Canada, there's a narrative that's framed in a certain way, which is omitting certain information or outwardly lying about other things, which gives people the impression that the world is not what it seems. And it is on purpose. And I did not believe that. I mean, I heard murmurings of things like that, but I didn't believe that until it actually happened to me personally in some of these things that I've been involved in. I think the most important thing is, first and foremost, educate yourself. And then, at Christmas, if you have a reasonable amount of education and grace, which is not always my strongest suit personally, I need to work on, but talk to other people, educate other people, because a lot of other people also don't think this stuff is going on. It's too crazy. It's totally out there and nutty, but it is happening. So there is just one last news story that I want to talk about, or that I'm going to have you talk about, Shannon, before we move on. And that is Dr. I'm going to say his name wrong, aren't I? Eappen?
Dr. Roy.
Who put out...
Dr. Roy.
The endocrinologist.
I love him. I was on a call with him this week. He is just a terrific human being. So Wall Street Journal, actually earlier in the summer, Dr. Roy put out an article in the Wall Street Journal that resulted in an international controversy. It generated the momentum for now. I'm short on the details here. I'm going from memory. Generated the momentum for a group of European doctors to sign off on a letter, significant editorial published in the United States, criticizing the divergence from global best practices and remaining stalwart in defending gender ideology and gender affirmation medicalization of kids, because most of Europe has gone the other direction, starting with the CAS review and tumbling over Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark, France. There's significant questions happening in New Zealand and Australia, and whereas in Canada is the worst in the world, and not an exaggeration, but the U.S. organizations as well. So Roy Eappen sort of lit this thing on fire, motivated this discussion, and immediately there was pushback. So there was criticism within hours of Dr. Roy putting up this article again on Thursday. One of the most influential trans activists in North America and the world put up a debunking of Dr. Roy's claims. Now, Dr. Roy is a gay man. He's in his 50s, possibly he's in his 60s now. And he pointed out his own experience growing up, talked about some of the history of being gay and lesbian and the rights movement and what's happening now. Actually, there was an anniversary, if I remember, a 50th anniversary of a major milestone in SHIFT. It was the change in diagnostics from pathologizing being gay and lesbian in the medical and psychiatric profession, and a 50th anniversary of that, and an end, which meant an end to conversion therapy. Right? There used to be shock treatments, there used to be lobotomy, there used to be like criminalization of homosexuality. There was major progress that we made that we should all be grateful for. Dr. Roy pointed out some of that, but then pointed to what's happening now. Again, like that quote that I read from Carolyn in Quebec, where you've got a trans organization bringing an activist into schools, convincing kids that might be just tomboys, not even lesbian, but he got all of a sudden, a bunch of girls saying, well, I want to be a boy. How do I do that? This came out on Thursday. I got a note in the back channels like Thursday night. It was already at 60 comments. And then yesterday, someone said, well, it's at 800 comments. By the time I checked, it was at 900 comments. This thing's got a huge amount of traction. And Dr. Roy really has, I think he's in a unique position. He's very well connected in the conservative circles. I was party to a conversation with him and Rex Murphy in the spring, and Rex just had nothing but great words to say about Dr. Roy. So he's plugged in all across the country and now in the States and making a big difference.
Excellent. And now for the main event.
Yeah, my deep dive.
Shannon, you have an interesting deep dive for us today that because I had nothing to do with it, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing all about it.
Let me share my screen. So this is, we've been calling this our weekly deep dive, and Melanie's been doing terrific work in some policy analysis, and I'm picking this up this week. This is related to a leaked video that a teacher, Ontario teacher, who attended this training session. It was sort of a announcement of a release of this training educator toolkit for teachers across Ontario. It is prepared by the University Western University. So this is academically prepared. We can see the names Jenny Casson, Wayne Martino, and Kenan Omarkajic. And I remember last week you were talking about Harper Keenan.
Yeah, who we're
from
talking
UBC.
about.
And I got the names confused. And I said, this Kenan guy sounds familiar. Kenan is actually a policy analyst for the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board. And because I pay attention to the OCDSB meetings, his name was familiar to me. I didn't plug that in. You know what? One of the things.
He's a policy analyst.
And a business manager of some sort with the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board. I talked to an Ottawa teacher this week. Okay. And he was fired. He was fired for retweeting, not even tweeting his own tweets, tweeting somebody else's tweets. He retweeted Dr. Deborah Stowe, who wrote the book The End of Gender, who is a sexologist, a PhD in neuroscience, and a researcher who has moved to journalism because she was punted out of academia for criticizing trans ideology back, I think, 2018. And for posting also Douglas Murray. Douglas Murray is a journalist and an outspoken, he's very well known in sort of, the downstream intellectual dark web. He wrote a book called The Strange Death of Europe and others. Anyhow, so this teacher was hauled into discipline. He was suspended. There was various stages of progressive investigations. The unions refused to defend him, because, of course, the unions are all captured by this. The unions are social justice organizations.
As we saw around the September 20th protests, how captured they truly are with the leaked video organizing against parents. Very captured.
So the union won't defend this teacher. There's this thing when you belong, if you're in a union, you might know this, when you belong to a union and you're paying union dues and you don't really have a choice in certain areas of our economy, you give up certain rights. You give up the right to sue your employer for wrongful dismissal. The union is supposed to represent you, right, in grievance cases. But in these cases, the union is refusing to defend teachers because the unions are fully captured activist social justice organizations that swallow this stuff hook line. He's not the only teacher. This is I talked to a number. Well,
would this be so? I'm just going to interject. A lot of teachers don't want to speak out, and this could be one of the reasons too, because there's a very real danger of getting fired and then and like you said, he didn't retweet his own. He retweeted somebody else's opinion on a social media site and got removed. Now, I often talk about being brave and speaking out. If this career path isn't working for you, then maybe prepare yourself for another career path, because it's very important to have a very tall spine and
have a
to
backup
speak
plan.
the truth.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I'm also very, and I am empathetic at the same time with the very real reality that this could happen to people. Now, I personally say, well, maybe you should be more strategic about it and have like a plan B and then go out with a bang. But it does happen. And obviously it happened
in
this
this
week.
case, this teacher has a plan B. Personal circumstances. I won't give anything away that's going to compromise his identity because he's not public, although he might choose to be at some point. He's well aware. And as you're going to see here, so this Educator Toolkit information session points to a document, the toolkit itself, that is about 90 something pages long. And I printed that off thinking I was going to spend some time analyzing it. Maybe over Christmas, we'll do some of the deep dive on it. And the first thing that we see, or among the first things, is a link to this other document. So the toolkit was based on a survey that was conducted, and the survey was distributed through the unions. That's the OSSTF and the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario and the various networks that these activist groups.
Who, might I add, the OSSTF, I think it is, Ontario Teachers, anyway, so they were at, was it secondary school? No, it was the young ones. It's the youth one, the union for the young ones. Right. They were at the very head of the pride parades this summer with kindergartners and second graders basically at pride parades, which is crazy. Yeah. But anyway.
Age inappropriate, right? Or age appropriate. They redefine those terms. So the survey was distributed through these union channels, and they got about 1,500 responses. They eliminated a bunch of the people who had responded. And this was this presentation. This is the Educator Toolkit. This is the reference document to the survey and the survey results. So I thought, okay, well, let's drill down a little bit and look at the background and get a grounding in this before I look at the Educator Toolkit. And this is the educator responses, as I said. We see those same people who involved in that, and we've got the author biographies. This is how I found out that Shannon, the policy analyst in the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. There's a deeper biography in the other document, and he was involved in another survey and metrics presentation, I want to say November 21st in Ottawa, which is kind of where I got to know him. So first couple of pages, we got our trigger warnings. This is customary, just like land acknowledgements that I mentioned earlier in the in our talk today. Transphobic content. Some responses to our survey included perspectives that denied the existence of trans and gender diverse people and were disparaging of trans inclusion in schools. We have included selected responses that contain explicitly transphobic language, not for shock value. Not for shock value. We don't want to scare you, but because they reflect a very real ingrained transphobic belief system that exists in Ontario schools. So be prepared. Prepare yourself for this hatred and bigotry that I'm going to share with you.
I don't have my pills on me. Goodness.
Get your crayons and your whoopee, everybody, and get yourself ready. We've contained them to the following pages. Put a box around them, page 44 and 58. They're also marked by the following warning symbols, so you can choose to skip over them. Okay. Remember, they fired a teacher for retweeting a sexologist, neuroscience researcher, PhD, internationally regarded author, and another journalist who talks about these things. So what's the next one? Now, notice the level of, we've got the critical consciousness analysis on the left-hand side of your screen, and then the horrible, bigoted, trigger warning worthy comments by parents or teachers who fed back into this. There's only two genders. Let's stop damaging children by lying to them about science. We're supposed to be educators, for heaven's sakes. Okay, transphobic resistance. Catholic faith supports specific male and female gender roles as defined by our DNA. Now, I don't know if Catholics support DNA. If we're referencing the Bible, this is a fairly new scientific understanding, but I'll lean into what this Catholic teacher is saying. I work with really young children. This is not an important issue for this age group. Reading, writing, and math are important. Bigotry, transphobic
That's
hatred,
bigotry. How dare you
trigger,
say? How
trigger
dare you?
warning. Okay. Um,
This is transphobic. This is transphobic to say that reading, writing, and math are more important than learning gender identity and
yeah.
expression for young
So,
children. So for a
so this,
5-year-old, this is transphobic. This requires a trigger warning.
right. And so, like I've said before, that being a teacher in Ontario schools today is like living in an Eastern Bloc country behind the Iron Curtain during the Cold War. There are just things that you're not allowed to say, you're not allowed to think, you're not allowed to express. And a document like this that's being deployed, and one of the things they say in their presentation is that it's not enough to have one teacher in a school who's kind of the expert and the guide on this. It needs to permeate. Everyone needs to pick up, everyone needs to use the language, everyone needs to be on board with this in this school system.
Can I add, this is why I go through some of the papers, because those papers are informing the policy that gets put into schools. So it's the academic thinking that then informs what kind of policies are being delivered in schools. And so these people come from that ilk. They come from that academic mindset. And so that's why this stuff is important. They're just changing the way that it's expressed in language that's more layman, but the same authoritarianism, the same conceptual thinking, it's all the same stuff. This is why it's important to know the academics, like I was saying last week about, the outer school, the inner school, and so on and so forth.
Have you caught your breath, Melanie? Are you ready for the next one?
I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know if I'll ever be ready.
I did this in a tweet thread, this was part of a larger tweet thread that I did yesterday. Here we go. Look out. I think we as educators are very misguided and are misguiding our youth in very dangerous ways in promoting alternative lifestyles. I'm not comfortable using these terms in my classroom because I do not think children should be taught about these topics. There are two genders, period. The social construct of gender is an ineffective use of language. And this is labeled transphobic refusal and resistance. Okay? These people have the power.
What they have a problem. This is having a problem with reality. What transphobic means is that we do not accept reality. Reality is transphobic. Other people's viewpoints are transphobic. Only what we say goes. What you say doesn't go. What you say gets labeled as this horrible thing that anyone listening to this, you really need to not be afraid of labels, even if you get fired. This is just me. Maybe I'm just extreme here. Maybe I'm the radical, but the more that we capitulate to this, the more that we allow these people to walk all over us, even just for a little bit, for our own comfort in this one particular moment, this keeps marching forward and it will not stop. It will not stop. So we need to stop allowing them doing this. We're talking about primary aged kids. One of the teachers in here is saying that their kids are too young to learn this, that children shouldn't be taught these topics. Since when do we send our kids to school to indoctrinate them with a political identity? Let me remind you that queer is a political identity. Hopper B. Keenan, one of the academics that I read a couple of weeks ago, tells you in his papers, and he's not the only one. Many of them tell you in their papers. I read papers about it all the time. They don't hide the fact that it's a political identity. It's nothing to do with sexual orientation, right? So since when are we sending our kids to school to teach them an explicit political identity that is designed inherently to undermine all stability and security within children? And that is labeled as evil and transphobic, and this idea of transphobic, we can't do it. And if you talk about it, you get fired.
Now, remember, one of the big stories this year was the Angus Reid polling that has come out. The first chunk of polling was around secret keeping in parents, having to do with after Scott Moe changed some of the policy in schools. And there was a leak. There was some explicit cards exposed to children in grade 9. The Angus Reid polling showed that 78% of Canadians are against teachers doing secret social transition at school. 78%. That's 8 out of 10 people. And it was only 14%. This number 14% comes up a bunch of times. a subsequent set of polling from Angus Reid came out that broke down Canada into basically the culture war categories. And the culture war categories show that only about, it's 14 or 15%, could be a little lower, a little higher, but in this group were the kind of radical social justice gender extremists. So we're talking like 1 in 7, 1 in 8 people in the country is thinking in these terms. And this is the product of these very small number of people, the small percentage of Canadians, but they are controlling our education system to the degree that teachers are terrified and they're walking around on eggshells and losing their jobs over saying things as basic as there are only 2 sexes.
Well, there's an argument to be made, because I don't think the reason we're keeping secrets has anything to do with outing children. I really don't. I think the idea of keeping secrets, and it's so vehemently held onto, is because as soon as you expose what they're doing and what they're teaching and you explain what's going on, very few people agree with it, right? If you understand what's going on, there are very few people that will go along with it. And so you need to keep secrets. And the way you get people on board to keep secrets is that you tell them that there might be some abusive parents, because in the past there were parents who were homophobic and might have hurt their children. But that's not the parents that they're targeting. They're targeting
30 years.
Look, I'm sure it still happens, but the point is they're not targeting those individual parents with a history of abuse. They're targeting all parents. All parents are viewed with suspicion. And I don't think it's because they actually fear that parents are a problem for children. The acceptance for LGBT even people is the highest it's probably ever been. There's a pushback. There's no doubt about that. But there's a lot of acceptance, more so than any other time in my life. And so I really think that this idea of secrecy is more about keeping parents from knowing what's going on, because what's going on is absurd.
If these ideologues who are controlling our education system are viewing their own teachers with these beliefs as heretics, as blasphemers,
well, they're going to expose them.
You have to get rid of them.
You have to fire them, because these are the kind of people that would expose them.
Their own colleagues in these terms, what are they thinking about parents? That's why they're keeping secrets. They're whipping themselves up into a lather of protecting the marginalized and the oppressed. And we're going to play a clip now. Melanie, do you have that? I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a sec, and we're going to get in and we're going to dissect a couple of chunks of this clip. This is from the release video and it's connected.
It's like a teacher training. Is that what it is?
With
like
the
a
Ontario
teacher
College
training
of Teachers or the OISE. This is official academic pedagogical deployment. Here we go.
Took place over a protracted period of time. Actually, the toolkit was only finalised with the public last week, right, Jenny and Ken? It was last week, yeah. So we're hitting. We were at this for a long time because I know you can never get it totally right, but we needed to be at that place where we felt we were doing justice to what we learned from educators about knowledge. They called for knowledge, they called for resources, and they called for support. And this was our attempt to try
what happened?
Back.
Bear with me.
Back to educators to support them in this human rights endeavour. And particularly at this point in time where it's a time of assault, it's a time of far-right extremism, weaponization of transphobia, and we cannot be silent. We cannot, push things under the carpet. We have to be very, very, and we're hoping that the toolkit will be a scaffolding mechanism and a support for educators in schools to do the work that is important, especially at this time. So with this module,
there's a genocide going on. Holy crap. And that genocide, that transphobic genocide, is teachers daring to say that their prepubescent children should not be learning about sexuality.
This guy's accent,
It's not helping his case.
It's haunting me. There's a certain I don't know. There's a certain smugness there that he's, is so self-righteous, so morally superior, so sanctimonious. It drives me crazy. I'm not a practicing Christian. I grew up in a Christian household, and this reminds me of the stories of Jesus confronting the Pharisees, who, they're the hypocrites. They're saying one thing, they're doing the other, and by virtue of their position and their titles and their particular use of language and righteousness are placing themselves above everybody else. This guy makes me sick.
Don't pull any punches there,
Oh,
Shannon.
oh,
Shall we
yeah.
continue?
It ties into that notion of knowledge and key terms. Educators told us that they did have some understanding of some key terms, but they didn't always feel confident actually to take an understanding of those terms further, right? So in this module, we're introducing some key terms that are central to building an understanding of gender.
Let me just point out here. So one of the important things to do that we don't often pay attention to is these trans activists, these queer theorists, they need to teach you new language. This is common. This is how I got into the exposing game. I exposed the YRDSB's gender expression guidelines glossary because of the terms in there. What they do is they spend a lot of time explaining, which he's going to do in a minute, words that you may have never heard of that are kind of new invented terms. And you need to understand these because these form the basis of what you're supposed to think. It forms the basis of what you're supposed to not only think, but teach to other people. This is, my opinion, we're watching brainwashing in action.
Yeah, in secret.
In secret.
Non-gender binary ways of thinking. And so the key terms are developed in this module in ways that we hope will help develop a deeper understanding of systems of oppression, that systemic oppression that Kenan was talking about related to gender identity, which extends beyond just a narrow focus on transphobia. Trans-affirming education is not and cannot just be about addressing transphobia, even though that's a very important part of the education piece. So we introduce terms like cissexism. You'll see them in this module explained, cisgenderism, cisnormativity, but not only are they explained, there'll be
not only are we going to explain it, we're going to send you links. We're going to give you a whole dictionary. We're going to really spend time on these words that you really need to understand and believe. By the way, cis, it's a chemistry word. Yeah, it's borrowed from chemistry. It means nothing when it comes to individual people in biology like this, but never mind. You need to believe this.
Such as the cisgender privilege checklist, for example, at one point in the module. Other resources we found which we thought would be really useful for educators. One was produced by the Canadian Federation of Students, and it's entitled Challenging Cisnormativity, Working Toward Gender Inclusive Spaces, and it provides, I think, a really excellent starting point for identifying and understanding what cisnormativity is. So there's this emphasis on building understanding.
He doesn't mean extending or building understanding. He means unlearn, which is something you hear a lot, not necessarily in here, we hear it a lot elsewhere. Unlearn what you know to be true and replace it. So his building of understanding is replace it with what we tell you should be in your brain. This cissexism, cisnormativity.
Leaders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're not building understanding here.
This whole is a remapping of reality. It's a remapping of language. It is part of cult dynamics. This is not an exaggeration or hyperbole. These people, as we know from public sentiment, from Angus Reid, are a very small percentage of the population. This is not normal. It is a small group of people pushing their delusional ideas on children.
Addressing transphobia, but what are the sources of the transphobia, right? And it's these broader systems of cisnormativity, cisgenderism, cissexism. And another wonderful resource that I just want to leave you with that you might want to search out once you get access to the toolkit, which we're going to be providing the link at the end of the session, Jenny and Kenan, right? That's our aim?
Yeah. I think that's the end of the clip that we're going to use.
Access. I just had an email from...
Can I talk about something in here?
Normal.
That's what I was going to mention, because there's a lot of talk about the terms that we're using, but they're all revolving around their understanding of what normal is. And the reason I'm saying their understanding of what normal is because I think sometimes, I'll just go over it quickly and then maybe you can spend some time on this, Shannon, if you like. But
will you stop
I think
sharing your screen?
sometimes
And while you're going there, Melanie, I will bring up the next.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sometimes we forget what normal means. And normal, it tends to be used as a value judgment. So like a morality judgment. Like we say something is normal, a lot of people think that means that it is morally acceptable. But that's not really what normal means. Normal is used in statistics, basically. It's really talking about where most people lie. There's such a thing called the bell curve. And in the bell curve, you have, the two margins at the end, two tails at the end, and like a lot of people in the middle, which just means that the vast majority of people are in the middle, and then you have tail ends. This is the normal distribution. This is what normal means. And in biology, for all species, all individuals, in terms of behavioral patterns, anything that exists really typically falls in a normal distribution like this. And all it means is that the vast majority of a population falls within the normal range, which is this, either 95% or 68%, depending on how you want to identify it. But that's what normal means. And normal is required. So if we're talking about the human species, or any species for that matter, specifically any sexual dimorphic species, and sexually dimorphic means you have male and female gametes, and you need both of those to produce a viable egg to reproduce the species, right? So we need that normal, what they call normative, and by normative they mean morally wrong, really oppressive. It is oppressive to be normative, which just means the vast majority of people. Now, the vast majority of people are going to be heterosexual. The vast majority of people are not going to be trans. And we need that because that's how you have a healthy species. Now, this is true for dogs. This is true for bony fish. This is true for ants. You need to have what they call normativity to perpetuate the species and to carry on living as human beings. It's nothing to do with a moral judgment. It's not a value statement about whether you're a good person or not. But for some reason, the queer cult uses the term normal as a value statement and makes it the enemy, the oppressive enemy. Now, let me tell you, any biologist worth their salt will tell you if you undermine normative function within a population, you're going to collapse that population.
Yeah.
Period.
We get into some.
So heterosexual individuals that are not trans are required for a species to reproduce and be healthy. That doesn't mean that the tail ends are immoral. It doesn't mean that it's wrong to not be heterosexual. It just means that most people are going to be, but that's not oppressive. It's okay. It's fine. Okay, so just to sum up, after all that rant, this graph is telling you this is what normal looks like in a population, that 68% of that population is going to fall within these, first standard deviations, this 34 and 34. And then you move standard deviation outwards, and then 95% of the population is going to be within this range. But it still means that the vast majority of individuals in a population are going to be along the mean, along the average, which is the middle here. And that's what normal means. And that's okay. Not only is it okay, it is actually necessary and desired within a population.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the ends against the middle. Let me just jump back to the language piece. So we heard from about cisnormativity. This is this is the very beginning of the document. We really haven't gone into anything more substantive than the first couple of pages, the trigger warning. And some of these key terms. So cisgender, cisgenderism, cisnormativity, decolonial, cissexism. This is, like I said, the tails against the middle, trying to dismantle the middle, trying to mobilize energy and force. Now, in woke ideology, in progressive left, or whatever, social justice, they believe that the world is constructed of power systems of oppression. And that the entire binding modus of reality is the struggle for power. There's no other motivating factors in society than the struggle for power. And these are actually the people who have the power. When unions, when school boards, when the human resources and the DEI departments of school boards in Ontario and across the country have the power to fire a teacher for retweeting somebody else's scientific credible position, or when, like in Carolyn Burjoski's case, they shut her down, censor her, defame her in the public sphere, and go out and set an environment of, like, they're terrorizing people. They've created extraordinarily toxic environments for their staff. There's no wonder, if you understand this positioning, there's no wonder why more PL teachers are quitting the profession than retiring. There's no wonder why they're not getting good quality teachers coming into the system. They're just not getting through the teachers training and teachers colleges, because this is the garbage that they're teaching. They believe that schools are set up to indoctrinate children, that they are political, education is political. This is the politics that they're pushing, and anyone who questions them, I've said this passionately before, gets destroyed.
Well, you can sort of see it recently with the Hamas protests, where you see young children like grade 4 and 5 out protesting in front of their schools. So we're teaching children to be political. So I don't think it's a stretch to include queer politics in for children, because it's all politics. Like, I don't remember, like, that would have been highly inappropriate when I was in primary school to do any kind of protesting. This is not for children. This is adults fight. If we get talking about politics, this is for adults, but what they're doing is they're undermining that and getting their politics to children early on. And like you said, it's oppressor and oppressed mentality is someone who's telling you that they view the world in terms of power games. And so someone who views the world in terms of power and has narcissistic tendencies or sociopathic tendencies will tend to want to see other people as having something they want. So there's an element of what's the word I'm looking for? Resentment, envy, and resentment in that as well. But what that's telling you is less about me. It's less about apparently I'm white, Eurocentric, cis, heteronormative, all of many things, many intersections that make me a high oppressor. But that way of viewing the world tells you more about their desire to gain power than it does about my actual power. And you see that, like, Shannon, I'm just going to translate some of the things you said in another way, is that you see that as many of these activists have seized positions of influence to disseminate their own ideology to gain more power. And they enact that power by being authoritarian, by getting rid of the people that could be harm to their ideology, by smearing people online, by having people like Anti-Hate Campaign get money from the government to completely smear people. Shannon, you've been the recipient of coordinated attacks against you because you did speak the truth in your own trustee campaign. And I've known several people now who've also had campaigns against them. And now we have this teacher that spoke to you that's just been removed from their position. So, you know, you instill fear, you gain power, you get children. So children's brains are really malleable. We know this. And so they're a really good age group to get this stuff into, because they're just going to trust you. This is a really good example to show this stuff is actually happening and how it's happening and where it's coming from, and the links between the academics down to the policy writers, down to those who disseminate some of the training, all the way down to teachers.
Now we've gone through this, this little slide presentation. There's one video that I want to finish on. Okay, so what we've gone through here with this toolkit for teachers is an attempt to communicate from the cult to the outside. It's a recruitment technique, which in cults is often manipulative and creates double binds and creates situations where you have to agree. So they've created an environment where you must agree or you get fired, basically. But once you're in the cult, this is the kind of language that you might hear. So we're going to queue up a video from Libs of TikTok that Melanie posted yesterday, and we're gonna close out for our episode this week and for our official news report, gender news report for the year.
about gender is influenced by my whiteness, which is obvious, but there's an interesting second part to this. The rejections of gender and gender roles that I create and embody will still come from my whiteness, those acceptable to my constructions of self as a white person. I will likely uphold and encourage white beauty standards and see and more immediately accept other white rejections of gender. Essentially, even the most critical analysis of gender I have will still be white, and white gender rejection can and does uphold whiteness and white supremacy. Queer appropriation of African American vernacular English is one example of this, as is mainstream exclusion of fashion excellence in Black representations of masculinity, while celebrating white men for having basic hygiene as if they're revolutionaries. Of course, that's not to say we can't attempt to take in other viewpoints, but it's still going to be a fundamentally white perspective. Even this is a white perspective. It's literally the only one I can give you. So if you want to learn how other people construct and deconstruct gender, you need to learn it from someone who doesn't look like me.
So last week, I discussed how many times the word whiteness, colonial, white supremacy, Marxist ways of framing the world popped up in one of Harper B. Keenan's papers, and I think it was over 30 times, not just for whiteness, but for the bunch of them. But yeah, it comes up an awful lot. So this was not Harper B. Keenan, but I posted this on my Twitter. The reason I posted it on my Twitter is because if Harper B. Keenan were to make a TikTok, and this is someone who's an academic in pedagogy and does trans pedagogy and queer pedagogy and is a leading figure in Canada in this area. If they were to make
Stanford
TikToks,
educated educator.
This is what it would sound like, because this is what I keep reading over and over and over in some of these queer academic papers.
Yeah.
So that's why I posted. I think this young man is an American.
This is how they talk to each other, right? What I was saying was that this toolkit is how they talk to people outside their circles, but this is how they talk to each other. What this reminded me of, and I've been following this, what we now call wokeness for a decade or more. And originally, I sort of was confronted by it when I was going through a really contentious divorce and a custody battle, and I was looking for resources. And connecting to other dads who were going through similar things to me, having their children taken away from them and having terms dictated. Like basically my ex-wife moved provinces, changed schools, made false accusations, circled the wagons around her and cut me off from my kids. And lots of dads, unfortunately, go through this kind of thing. And the system is tilted towards, presuming that men are the bad guys, the bad people, and women are the innocent flowers. And what systems don't do this can be easily co-opted in the public sphere. So it's easy to turn people against good dads with some wild accusations. So going back 10, 12 years, and then I started seeing, I was following a professor of English from University of Ottawa U, Janice Fiamengo, who is an anti-feminist, and she's lovely, but she was putting up videos of these compelled confessions of white privilege. This is going like 2015, where boys were standing up in lecture halls and saying, I don't really know, I can't really speak to this, or I can only speak to this in terms of, from my frame as a male, and I couldn't possibly understand, and because of my whiteness, and there was a type of self-flagellation, and it was compelled. Right? If you were in certain lecture halls, certain classes, you had to learn how to speak by submitting yourself and not humbling yourself, but to lower yourself in the room. And that's also
cult stuff. That's cult stuff.
Yeah. And this guy is like that, dressed up like a fucking clown. It is like on amphetamines. It is, this guy is not a man. He's a pathetic excuse for maleness. He has no balls. And that's coming from a normie. This guy, the words that come to my mind are pejorative. He's a fucking queer. And that's
he is, like, that's not a pejorative. That's what he is. That's what he's telling you, that he's telling you that he is queer and that he believes that cisnormativity is bad. And what you're talking about right now is whiteness personified. You are the personification of the white colonial, cis heteronormative male. You are oppressive. This is exactly what we do not want to see in the world, that you need to sit down, shut up, mind your business. And if you,
at some point, the backlash is going to come, and we're going to hear that term that I used more often, and it's going to involve, unfortunately, I fear, and as other people have said, a rise of an extremist identitarian right, and there is going to be a whole lot of violence.
Well, that's one of the tactics. So one of the tactics of revolutionaries, right, is to keep saying that this thing is happening, even though it's not, until it does. So one of the tactics is the white supremacists are on the rise. The white supremacists are on the rise. The white supremacists are on the rise. Oh, one day, maybe there are white supremacists that are actually kind of pushing back.
Yeah.
And so
he's elicited
that could actually happen.
And created a reaction in me that I think hatred is appropriate to say.
But that's kind of what happens, though. Like, that is a tactic. That's what I'm saying. And so it's very important. I'm glad that you brought up actual white supremacists maybe rising up in retaliation to this sort of thing. And Jordan Peterson talks about it, and James Lindsay talks about it. Is the rise of the far right, actual real far right, in response to some of this stuff. But that's in essence, not to victim blame here, but that's the point. They're bringing on themselves. And so if you keep accusing people of something, then eventually when they do that,
create the response that you fear.
Yeah. But that's because they want it. They want that. And by doing that, you can seize more power. That's a power. It's actually a power tactic.
To use it to, well, what was we talked about this in September and October. It's, you want to get a response. And you put people in a position where no matter how they respond,
well, your reaction is the ultimate action. That's
the one.
That's part of it. Yes.
Yeah. And so this toolkit, this kind of video of this pathetic human, he's simping, right? This is a way to simp for him to get girls. He's showing everybody how
maybe not. I mean, like, there's no way of
virtue, or maybe boys.
You're just mad
I don't
about
know.
it right now.
But he's so
literally,
proud
you're just
of
mad
himself.
about it right now because you have no idea what this guy's sexuality is. But there's certainly an element of provocation. There's an element of even if people like you react, because what you're doing right now is playing into that hand because of the overreaction, basically, right? So they're winning by your overreaction, and it's kind of the point, because the people who are on the fence and listen to this, I might agree, he's won. The people who overreact, he's also won. And so the best way to respond, in my opinion, is not overreacting, but continually breaking these things down and explaining them and providing a really solid response as to why this stuff does not make sense. Because the overreaction is literally giving them what they want. That's just how I look at it. So that's the reaction so your overreaction is their true action. So when people come up to you at a protest and start shouting in your ear, go, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you. They want you to overreact. They want you to blow up, because that means they've won. That means you look bad and they can justify their own actions. And certainly in the temperature that we exist in right now in Canada, you would be in the wrong, even though what they're doing is completely, in my opinion, completely immoral and wrong in every possible way, because they've come after children. You want to do it on your own? I'm actually cool with that. Like, I don't mind. You want to be a queer theorist? Go ahead. Like, I don't agree with you, but I'm cool with it. But when you go for children, it's wrong.
Yep.
But we lose when we overreact, because they have captured so many people on the basis of safety and protection. Right? Because they've spun that. So that's another example. Safety. We're unsafe. With the flags today, we talked about flags. They need flags to be safe. They're not unsafe. But if you keep saying that and keep putting that in people's heads, this is a tactic. Eventually, when somebody does get really mad, when you push it too far, they go, see, we're unsafe.
Yeah.
That's the overreaction. That means they've won. What a way to end today's episode today.
Yes, Melanie, I enjoy our conversation so much. That's why we ended up doing this, because we cover a lot of great ground together, and we're both really passionate about this subject. If you're a parent watching this, please share it. We're going to slice and dice this. I segment the video so that you can pull up a section. If you've got people over Christmas who are saying, well, we don't really think this is happening, or it couldn't be that bad. It is that bad. It's hideous what's happening in our education system. And if this continues, I think we are in deep, deep trouble in our society right now because of this. This has been infesting our institutions and spreading like a virus in our institutions for a long, long time. It certainly developed momentum in the last 5 years that's undeniable. We need to act. And I'm hoping that 2024 is going to be a year where we see even more public outcry, more people standing up, more people saying no, more people setting boundaries against these incursions into our bathrooms, into our sports, into our swimming competitions, into our classrooms, and into all of our institutions. This needs to end.
And on that bombshell, see you next week, Shannon.
Melanie, thanks so much. Great chatting as always.
Thanks for watching to the end. If you liked this episode, try clicking on one of the next ones. Go on, click it.